So Job chapter 30 this morning, verses 1 to 8. But now they mock at me, men younger than I, whose fathers I disdained to put with the dogs of my flock. Indeed, what profit is the strength of their hands to me? Their vigor has perished. They are gaunt from want and famine, fleeing late to the wilderness, desolate and waste, who pluck mallow from the bushes and broom tree roots for their food. They were driven out from among men. They shouted at them as at a thief. They had to live in the clefts of the valleys, in caves of the earth and the rocks. Among the bushes they brayed, under the nettles they nestled. They were sons of fools, yes, sons of vile men. They were scourged from the land. Just looking at that first opening few verses, you can see a bit of a difference now. The last time we looked in Job chapter 29, he was talking about the past and how great were the blessings of God in the past and how God had watched over him and how God had blessed him and he was prospering. Everything was going good and he didn't really have much of a thought of what might happen in the future, except it didn't look too good. So coming into the new year, that was a good thing to remind ourselves of the past and wonder what will the future hold for us. But if you notice some key words that appear throughout this chapter, you'll see that the word now appears at least 3 times. In verse 1, in verse 9, and verse 16, you'll see but now and now. So going from what was happening in the past, Job is now concentrating on, but how are things right now? And what time are we living in? Are you living in the past, the present, or the future?
Present.
The present, that's right. We're living in the present. And so Job can say, I remember how good it was in the past, but now they mock at me. Men younger than I. You remember in the last section, we were just saying how when he walked into town, Job says, the young men and the old, they all respected him. Isn't that right? But he says, but now they mock at me, even men younger than I. Those whose fathers, I wouldn't even give them a job as a sheepdog or basically to work amongst his sheep. Job had 7,000 sheep and he needed a few people to work with those sheep. And he says, I wouldn't have even put their fathers to work with me amongst the flocks or the dogs of my flock. Indeed, what profit is the strength of their hands to me? I don't need their help. Their vigor has perished. They are gone. These are people, he says, that have become outcasts of society. They are so bad that they were driven from among men and had to live out in the wilderness. He says, they are gone from want and famine, fleeing late to the wilderness, desolate and waste, who pluck mallow by the bushes and broom tree roots for their food. They were scavenging around looking for food. These are the sort of people that were now mocking Job. He says they were driven out from among men. They shouted at them as at a thief. And these guys who are mocking Job, they had to live in the clefts of the valleys, in caves of the earth and the rocks. And if you want to know, is there such a thing as a caveman? There you go, right in the Bible. Yes, there were people who were forced to live in caves because there was nowhere else to live. There you go, in caves of the earth and the rocks. Among the bushes they brayed. They just were. These are what are considered in the terminology of Job's day, the dregs of society. The worst of the worst. They were under the nettles they nested. They were sons of fools. And you probably could use stronger language than that. Sons of fools. They were sons of vile men. They were scourged from the land. In other words, scourged, the outcasts of society. These are the guys who now have turned around and start mocking at Job. Okay? And so in the next section, starting off with the words, and now I am their taunting song. Yes, I am their byword. They abhor me. They keep far from me. They do not hesitate to spit in my face, because he has loosed my bowstring and afflicted me. They have cast off restraint before me. At my right hand, the rabble rises. They push away my feet, and they raise against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path. They promote my calamity. They have no helper. They come as broad breakers. Under the ruinous storm, they roll along. Terrors are turned upon me, and they pursue my honor as the wind, and my prosperity has passed like a cloud. So I was reading that and thinking, what must it be like to become the brunt of jokes? You know, when they're making jokes, you know that guy, and they make jokes about him, and they're singing songs about him. And I was asking just this week, you know, those country and western songs where people have made someone's name part of the song? I don't know if they're true stories based on characters, Jolene and Lucille and whoever they might be, all these characters. Was it something that they didn't like that suddenly they became the song, and it became a joke, a story told about them? But they're singing about Job and making jokes and taunting songs. It says, he says, I became a byword. You know what it's like to be like Job there. And he says, they abhor me, they hate me, they keep far from me. They basically give him a wide berth, but not so far away, because they're able to spit in his face. Did you know that to spit in someone's face, even today or any time, and especially back then, it was a great insult to spit in someone's face? And that's what they did. That's what had become of Job. And he says, I was the guy that when I walked into town, everyone's honoring me. Now I'm the joke. I'm laughed at, I'm mocked, they spit at me, they keep their distance from me. What is going on here? And it's all because, verse 11, he says, and I know it's because of this, because he has loosed my bowstring and afflicted me. Now, we might not understand what that would mean. He's loosed my bowstring. It seems to speak of vitality and strength, because God has touched my life. God is the one who's allowed this to happen. If it wasn't for God doing this, they couldn't have done all of that at all, because he has afflicted me, and they have cast off restraint before me. At my right hand, the rabble rises, and that's what they're like, riff-raff, you know, the mob, those who rise up against you, and they push away my feet. And listen to this, they push away my feet, and they raise against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path, they promote my calamity, and they have no helper. This seems to be, and if you look at different translations of it, it seems to say, they're setting traps for me. They're pushing me around. I don't know what it's like to be continuously bullied and knocked and shoved around, but that's what he's saying. That's how I'm treated nowadays. And I couldn't help but think about how, in one sense, he's foreshadowing the Lord Jesus Christ, who, though he was the great guy and had done so many good things for these people, he'd healed the sick and cast out devils and worked many miracles. At one point, they all completely turned against him, did they not? And Job is experiencing what it is to have done a lot of good things for people, and yet them turning against him. And they set traps for my feet. And there's no one to stop them. It says there in the King James, or New King James, verse 13, they have no helper. That's difficult, because you wonder, what does it mean? They have no helper. There's no one to stop them. There's no one to stand and restrain them from what they do. They come as broad breakers. You know, that's like the constant waves of a storm just lashing upon somebody. Have you ever been in a storm and have waves just hit up against a boat or a ship? Or have you ever felt these winds just blowing around? They're strong. And he says, they come as broad breakers, like waves under the ruinous storm. They roll along. Terrors are turned upon me, and pursue my honor as the wind. And finally, and my prosperity is passed away like a cloud. He has recognized that all of these troubles that have come upon me, just wave after wave, trouble after trouble, and all of it has resulted in my prosperity. Now, what did Job have at the beginning? You'd have to go back to Job chapter 1 to read it again. It says, according to Job chapter 1, verse 1 to 3, it says, there was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. And listen to his possessions. Also, his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Now what has happened? He says, my prosperity has vanished. It's gone. It's all gone. Have you ever considered what it would be like to have everything and then lose it all? I mean, literally lose everything. Listen, that's what he's experiencing here. And we could just be reminded of a few things. First of all, 2 Corinthians chapter 12 speaks about Paul being afflicted, and he said, it was like a messenger of Satan. Listen to this. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. Paul had such revelations and understanding of God, and he says in verse 7, unless I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan. Who was it? A messenger of Satan to buffet me. Now, buffet means to pound, grind and pound, or grind and pound, right? Just continuously buffeting, not just once, but continuously bombarding him and buffeting him, lest I be exalted above measure. Okay, so he's been experiencing this pounding. But listen to also this in Philippians chapter 4. Paul also spoke about having had much and knowing what it was like to live in abundance. Listen to this. Philippians chapter 4, verse 10. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at last your care for me has flourished again, though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Now that I speak, not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. Okay, to be content in whatever state I am. He says, I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be empty, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Okay, so I don't know what he's saying there, other than I know what it is to live in abundance, and I know what it is to have lack, and I can live in both ways and be completely content. Can you? Because that's what Job was having to learn. He says, I had the life of abundance and prosperity. Now I'm learning what it is to have nothing, to have lack. What's going on here? And so that is what Job is experiencing. He says, I've been through all of that. Let me go back to Job chapter 30. And then in verse 16, it says this, and now, again, back to the present time, and now my soul is poured out because of my plight. The days of affliction take hold of me. My bones are pierced in me at night, and my gnawing pains take no rest. By great force, my garment is disfigured. It binds me about as the collar of my coat. He has cast me into the mire, and I've become like dust and ashes. So again, he's saying here, I feel like my whole life is ebbing or slipping away from me. My strength is going. If you read that in different translations, it says there, let me just turn to the NIV, I think it says this. Yeah, both the NIV and the NLT speak about it growing weaker and weaker moment by moment. He says, I can feel it slipping away from me, and I know that there are days of affliction ahead of me. Listen to this. We know from Job chapter 2, verses 7 and 8, I believe it is, that Job had boils from head to toe. And that wasn't the only thing he suffered. Did you know that he had other things that were associated with his pain? He wasn't just going through that. He says here, I have, my bones are pierced in midnight. I don't mean he was just saying it's cold and I feel like it's cold that your bones can feel it. He says, this has taken hold of me in such a way that my bones are pierced at night, and my gnawing, now I didn't say annoying, it's gnawing, G-N-A-W. It's just constantly like feeling like a dull pain, constantly there. Gnawing pains take no rest. It's constantly there. I mean, he's in a miserable condition. And he says, by great force, my garment is disfigured. What does that mean? Someone wrecked his shirt? Does someone ruffled his collar? No, it means that he feels like God has taken hold of him like by the collar and has grabbed his coat and thrown him into the dirt. It's a very strange way of looking at things. By great force, my garment is disfigured. It binds me about as the collar of my coat. And he says in verse 19, he has cast me into the mire. And if you look at different translations, obviously it means he's thrown me down into the mud, into the muck. I feel like I've been completely cast down and I've become like dust and ashes. In other words, what do you do with dust and ashes? It's for the bin. He's rubbish. He feels, I feel like rubbish. I feel like I'm useless and worthless and cast away. And I don't know if anyone's ever felt that bad, that you said, it's even worse. It'd be bad. It'd be all right if you were already like that and you said, I had nothing and I still got nothing. But if you had everything and you had such an abundance and now you've lost it, it's even worse, because you feel like, I know what it was to have everything. And that's what Job was experiencing. Very sad to hear that. Now, then in verse 20, we read this: I cry to you, but you do not answer me. I stand up and you regard me, but you have become cruel to me. With the strength of your hand, you oppose me. You lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride on it. You spoil my success. For I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all living. Well, let's just have a look at that. First of all, Job feels like, I have been calling out to you, God, day and night. I don't know if you remember how the Bible speaks about Jesus on the cross. He was crying out to God, my God, where are you? But Job's also crying out, God, I have been crying out to you. Why do you not take any notice of me? Now, we do read it in the Bible. It says, I cry out to you, but you do not answer me. And different translations say this, and I'm amazed at the way it's translated. Let me just say this. The NIV says this: I stand up, but you merely look at me. It's as if, God, you're really not bothered with you merely look at me. And the NLT says, I stand before you, but you don't even look. And the ESV, which some of you might have, is, I stand and you only look at me. As if, like, I'm not really interested. And that's how Job feels, as if, God, no matter what I do, you don't seem to be showing any interest in my need, my situation at all. Why don't you answer me? He says, but you have become cruel to me. I don't know if you've ever thought that God is either not interested in your situation, couldn't care less, or that have you ever pointed to God and said, you're cruel. Why are you not interested? Why are you not taking care of me? You don't care? Ever thought it like that? Why have you become cruel to me? With the strength of your hand, you oppose me. I feel like your hand is against me. Now, is it true that God's hand was against Job? You remember back in the very beginning of this story of Job, it was Satan who said, why don't you stretch out your hand, God, against Job? Do it. And I bet you he will turn against you. And he says here, this is what Job says, you have become cruel to me. With the strength of your hand, you oppose me. Well, we should get our facts right, because it was way back in the beginning that's what that Satan had said, that you can do it, God, you can stretch out your hand. And what did God say? Let's just turn there to Job chapter 2 for a moment, just to see the context that chapter says. We'll go to verse 3, chapter 2, verse 3. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, and one who fears God and shuns evil, and still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without a cause. So Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. And even after all of the things that he's experienced, Job did not curse God to his face. But what did God say in response to that, what Satan said? In verse 6, and the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life. So even though God is saying, Satan, you go ahead, you can touch him, you can afflict him, but I'm putting limits on what you're allowed to do. No matter what happens, God is always in control. And he said, Satan, you're not to take his life. Okay? You can go so far, but that's it. Limits are put upon Satan. He can't do whatever he wants. And so it was the devil put out his hand to touch Job, but God obviously permitted that to happen. Okay, so now look at this. Verse 22, you lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride on it. And really another way of putting that is like this. I'm tossed around like a tin can in the wind, or I've been tossed around in the wind. And I was reminded one stormy night, probably about a week ago, everything was blowing around. Did you hear the wind blowing? It was that bad. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm hearing this noise in our driveway. And I thought, what is that? It's such a noisy thing. And what was it? It was a turkey tinfoil base knocking around in the driveway. And I thought, yep. And it's such a noise, and the neighbors probably going to be complaining. But look, Job is feeling tossed around all over the place. And you're not like, I'm nothing. I'm helpless in the hands of God. And I like the last line there. You spoil my success. Have you ever been on a road to victory, a path to success, and you thought, I'm on the road that's leading somewhere, I'm going somewhere here, and yet someone just blocked your path? Has anyone ever cut across your path and spoiled your victory? Has anyone ever done that for you? Has anyone got in the way of your success? I wonder. Well, Job has had success for sure, but he says, now you've spoiled it, you've ruined it. Even if it comes to natural things like, whether you were supposed to get a promotion, or you were in a job and someone else got that thing and you didn't get it, and you wonder, why is that? Why is that being permitted? Well, God can have a reason for things that happen in our lives. Ultimately, we may be on the longest road to somewhere, right? Where is that? We're on the road, as verse 23, for I know that you will bring me to death. That's the ultimate goal, the ultimate destination for the natural man. We are headed to one place, death, okay? For I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all living. I don't know if you realize this, that we have an appointment, and you can go over into the New Testament and find this in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27. It says, for it is appointed unto men. It literally does say that, just in case you think, my movements are restricted, but if I have an appointment, I'm supposed to be allowed to keep that appointment, am I? Is that okay? Yeah, is that true? Even with all the lockdowns, if you said I have an appointment somewhere and I have to keep it, they're not going to stop you, right? All right. Well, Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27 says, and as it is appointed for man to die once. But after this, the judgment. That is how it's going to be for every single one of us. Amen. And so here we have in Job he says, I know. It's no one else is going to do it. It's ultimately only God who is in control of these things. I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all living. I know that that's where I'm headed for. Now, whether that's going to happen in the life and story of Job is another matter, but that's what Job's expectations are. You know what? Because he's on this, as I said many times, he's on a roller coaster. He's up and down. Sometimes he's full of hope and excitement and has great plans for the future. At other times, he's feeling so low. He says, look at the state I am in right now. Nothing good will come from this. And so finally, in the last section of this, from verse 24, it says this, surely he would not stretch out his hand against a heap of ruins if they cry out when he destroys it. Have I not wept for him who was in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? But when I looked for good, evil came to me. And when I waited for light, then came darkness. My heart is in turmoil and cannot rest. Days of affliction confront me. I go about mourning, but not in the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry out for help. I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. My skin grows black and falls from me. My bones burn with fever. My harp is turned to mourning, and my flute to the voice of those who weep. Interesting little section right there just to finish off with. But he does say this, surely he would not stretch out his hand against a heap of ruins. And we saw there in Job chapter 1 and 2 that it was the devil, Satan, who was saying, God, you stretch out your hand. But God says, I'm not going to stretch out my hand just for no reason. There's always a reason. And Job says, would he would God stretch out his hand against a heap of ruins? What does that mean? Well, a man whose life is like a mess, a ruinous heap, because that's what you see in the NIV, a person who's fallen apart. Would God put out his hand against someone whose life has fallen apart, like a wrecked old country? You've seen those cottages out in the countryside, sometimes broken down. Would God stretch out his hand against someone whose life is like that? Well, he says, no, he wouldn't do that. And that's the reason God stepped into the story whenever Job was in the height of his prosperity and blessing. He says, and if they cry out when he destroys it, and listen to this, verse 25. Have I not wept with those for him who was in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? I mean, yes, if you go back to the previous chapter, he says, I was helping the blind, I was helping the lame, I was helping all kinds of people, poor people, people who were afflicted, the widow. Remember, we talked about that last time. He says, I was helping those people, but when my need comes, when it's time for me to get some help, there's no one to help me. Where are they all? You see, he believed, as many people do, that one good turn, what's the rest of it? One good turn deserves another. You know, if you do good to others, they're going to do good to you. Is that always the case? It's not always the case, folks. Sometimes you can do a lot of good and you expect something back from those people, and you can be very disappointed because they're going to let you down. Because you do good, but you do it unto God. You don't do it unto men. And Job has done a lot of good, and he says, I did all that for those people. Have I not wept for him who was in trouble? Has not my soul grieved for the poor? But when I looked for good, evil came to me. Instead of good coming, I found evil or calamity or trouble. And when I waited for light, then came darkness. And so what's going on? Why have all these things not turned out the way I expected? My heart, and that is my innermost being. And I like the way it is translated in various translations there. Let me just find the one. The NIV says, the churning inside me never stops. Days of suffering confront me. So in other words, I'm living in continuous inner agony, turmoil. I feel it all churned up. I don't know if you've ever felt like that inside. You're like, oh, I just feel like a whole big mess inside, especially if you're feeling anxiety. Have you ever felt such anxiety that your whole innermost being is like, just feels like a turning around all the time? Oh, he said, I live like that all the time. And by the way, what he's living is the outworking of what he had said. Listen to Job in the first chapter. Whenever all his troubles began, and before the boils came, when all his children were killed, and when all his flocks had been stolen and burned up or robbed, it says here, verse 20, this is Job chapter 1, verse 20. Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. Now, I don't know if that would be the response of most people when trouble hits, that they began to worship. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And all this, Job did not sin nor charge God with wrong. And you see, because when you say that God has given all this stuff to Job, he has experienced it. He talked about that in the 29th chapter. I have all this prosperity. And now it's all taken away. It's disappeared. It's gone. He says here in the first chapter, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. And when people hear that, especially the faith folk, they go, no, Job got it all wrong. God is not a taker. God is a giver. God could not have taken anything from Job. It was the devil. And so let's read it again. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Is that a negative confession? Or does the next verse not say in verse 22, in all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. He ultimately realized God is in control of all things. And I don't know why it's happening, but I do know I've had everything and I've lost it all. Okay. Go back to chapter 30. And we see here, my soul, my heart is in turmoil and cannot rest. Days of affliction confront me. I go about mourning, but not in the sun. And yeah, that's a very strange thing, because in different translations it says, I am blackened, but not by the sun. By the way, this blackness all over me, that's not sunburn, okay? I am in mourning, and I'm covered in darkness. Maybe because, you know, people wear black clothing when it comes to mourning, but I don't know what it is. But he says, I'm covered, I'm blackened, but it's not because of the sun. And you can translate that different ways. Yes, could be that he's in mourning and he put something on him, and it's not because of the darkness of the caused by the sun. He says here, I stand up in the assembly and cry out for help. I mean, he's been into the town center before, and everyone was like, stand up, respect him. But now he looks for help, and there's nobody helping him at all. I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Where would you find jackals and ostriches? And some translations say owls. But these are strange fellows to have companionship with, isn't that right? I was down at, is it Fota Park in Cork, where there's an ostrich and those funny looking creatures. What a companion to have. But that's what he says, I was with the strangest of companions. Now, verse 30, my skin, this goes back to what I said in the previous verse, my skin grows black and falls from me. My bones burn with fever. That's another one of the results of his illness. It was not just the boils, as we've said, and the pains that strike you to the bones, the gnawing pains, but he says, my skin grows black and bits of it start falling from him. Not very pleasant, is it? Your skin falling off in black bits? Not nice. And my bones burn with fever. That's a person who's in a lot of continuous pain. Okay? And finally, he says, my harp is turned to mourning and my flute to the voice of those who weep. So, you know, the Bible speaks about the Lord has turned my mourning into dancing, but this is the reverse. He's turned my rejoicing into mourning. And that's what Job's saying. I have had that experience of, I've lost everything. Now, what can we learn from all of this? There's lots of things that we could say, that we could learn from this lesson. Okay, you can see chapter 29, 30, and 31 are all part of one big speech. And in one part, he's speaking about the past, and now he's speaking about the present. But unfortunately, it seems like he's looking to people as the ones who he should have had help from. We should learn this lesson, that the Lord is the one who gives to us and he can take away. That we should be able to be content with whatever we have. And ultimately, we should be able to say, my source is God alone. I don't look to people. I don't expect help to come from them. I don't expect someone to step in and supply all of my needs. I look to God, just like we saw from the Apostle Paul. We saw there in Philippians chapter 4, he says, I know what it is. Let's go back there. I want to just maybe close with these thoughts. Paul summed this up in Philippians chapter 4. And we'll only have to read from verse 11. And he says this, not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. And I wonder how many of us can say, I am content. I don't need anything more. I have what I have. I'm content with my situation in life. Okay, I am content. I know how to be abased, to be put down, to be humbled, to be abased. And I know how to abound. Some of us have passed the test when it comes to being put down, but can you pass the test when it comes to being filled with abundance? Because maybe you've never been there. And some people have never had it the other way around. They've never known what it is to be in total lack. And it can be a stretch of our faith, isn't that right? Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. And I think from experience as well, that it's good to have had a little bit of both, you know, to have had times whenever we had nothing and you have to look to God alone. Okay. And then he can say this, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I look to the Lord as the one who is the strength of my life. One last verse, maybe I'll just turn to Job chapter 2 again. Remember, Job spoke about, I expected life, I expected good to come, but calamity came. Well, you remember that when all these things have happened and he's just been afflicted with all these boils, and we read in Job chapter 2, verse 8, and he took for himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself, because he had all these itching boils, while he sat in the midst of the ashes. Verse 9, then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. Why don't you just speak to God's face and curse him and die, just like the devil was suggesting? And he said, in verse 10, but he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? That's what it says here. Now, different translations might say evil, but adversity would be a good translation. Shall we not also accept? Now, some people are saying, no, we should never accept adversity. We should only accept good things from God. Is that right? He says it again. You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? And it goes on to say, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So he was saying what is right. And he had learned, he's now living it out. He says, I have had that. And look at me now. I am now in a place where I have no one to look to. I have to only look to one place, and that's God. God is our source of our complete supply for everything in life. Amen. He's our Savior, our Deliverer, our Redeemer, and he's our Lord. Amen. I want to close it down.